Folks, want to thank all of you for making Locked On College Basketball your first listen or your first watch of the day. Shout out to those everyday listeners checking us out as well. We are continuing our conference preview series here, discussing every college basketball conference in the country. We're discussing the biggest storylines. We're discussing the who we think is going to win, the favorites, the dark horses. We're going to rank all the teams into tiers as well. We're also going to make some award predictions to close out the show, player of the year, coach of the year, all of that good stuff. Today, we're talking the Southland Conference. And the big storyline in the Southland is 5 new coaches. This is a 10-team conference. Half of the teams are turning over their coaching staff, or at least their head coach from last season. The most notable is McNeese, the Cowboys. We're bringing in Will Wade. Will Wade, of course, former LSU head coach, 5 total NCAA tournament appearances in his career, 2 of them at VCU out of the A10. The other 3 were at LSU, was a tremendously successful coach with the Tigers, 105 wins to 51 losses. That includes that remarkable 25-5 season in that 2018-19 campaign. But Will Wade was let go at LSU because of recruiting violations. It was unclear at the time what his punishment was going to look like. Since then, we have found out that Wade is going to be suspended for the first 10 games of the upcoming season. He will not coach for McNeese until their 11th game of the year. He also has a 2-year show cause, but that's all that he was faced with. So McNeese gambled and gambled successfully on landing a coach who has tremendous pedigree. He's won at the Power 5 level. He's won at the mid-major level. He's won at every level that he has been at. And now he's tasked with turning around a team in McNeese who has not made the NCAA tournament in over 20 years. This is a huge victory for McNeese, and we'll talk a lot more about their roster, who Will Wade brought in, what this team looks like, how quickly they might be able to turn it around. But long-term, this is a great poll for the Cowboys. Again, 4 other coaching changes we'll go through quickly here. Northwestern State replaces Corey Gibson with Rick Cabrera. Gibson was hired at Austin Peay after just 1 season at Northwestern State. He went 22-11 in that 1 season. That was enough for him to get bumped up to a different level. Meanwhile, Cabrera comes in. He has not been a Division I head coach before, but he has been a high school head coach, a community college head coach. He's also been an assistant coach at Chattanooga, Austin Peay, and Arkansas State. Incarnate Word also makes a coaching change. They replaced Carson Cunningham with Shane Hireman. Carson Cunningham was let go after a not very productive 5-year run as the head coach at Incarnate Word. 42-105, just under 29% for that winning rate there. Not a surprise to see him let go. Hireman comes over after a 5-year run as an assistant coach at DePaul and then a 2-year run as the associate head coach at Central Michigan. Texas A&M Corpus Christi had a huge overhaul with their roster and their coaching staff after back-to-back NCAA tournament appearances under Steve Lutz. Lutz took him to those 2 tournaments and then took that head coaching job for the Hilltoppers at Western Kentucky. Hard to blame him there. A&M Corpus Christi is hoping to stick with the same kind of thing by bringing in Jim Shaw. Shaw's promoted as an assistant coach since 2021. He was under Coach Lutz for the last 2 years while they went on those back-to-back tournament runs. So I think the program is hoping that he can continue to kind of keep that vibe alive for them. Prior to his time at Corpus Christi, he was an assistant coach at Tarleton and Texas State. Then finally, Nichols is replacing Coach Austin Clonch with Tevin Sadler. And Clonch went 16-15 last year. He did go 90-61 in total over his time at Nichols, which is why he left to get an assistant coaching job under Nate Oates at Alabama. 2 regular season titles for Clonch. This is a tough loss for this Nichols program, but they bring in a coach who, if all goes well, he might be here for 40-something years because the guy they're bringing in, Tevin Sadler, is 28 years old. He played at Nichols in the 2017-18 season. That's not that long ago at all. He was a Dobo for the program for the next couple of years after that. He then spent 1 season as the player personnel director at Maryland. Now he comes back, taking over as a head coach at age 28. Personally, I'm very interested to see how somebody with that age, that youth with limited experience. I mean, director of player personnel is still not an assistant coach. It'll be interesting to see how that works out for Nichols, a team that has had a fair amount of success in the last couple of years. Beyond just the coaching changes, there are some other stuff going on in the Southland Conference. And as we talk about so often when we do these conference preview series, especially when we're talking about lower majors like the Southland Conference, the story is typically transfers out. Modern era, with thousands of guys transferring every single year, players who are productive at a level like the Southland are typically going to move on to greener pastures. And that is a big part of the story outside of the coaching changes for this conference. Southland Player of the Year, DeMarcus Sharp, has moved from Northwestern State to Austin Peay. That is where he is going to play next season. Again, that he's following his coach, Corey Gibson, who took that job from Northwestern State, so can't really blame him there. Not the only guy moving on to Austin Peay. Southland's second teamer, Jamonta Black, also going there from Northwestern State, so Gibson takes two key pieces from that Northwestern State team along with him. Beyond that, a pair of first-teamers outside of Sharp are also moving on. First-teamer Terrion Murdix goes from Corpus Christi to Western Kentucky. Again, not a surprise there as he is following his head coach. Fellow first-teamer Isaac Mushila, also at Corpus Christi. He's not going to Western Kentucky, though. He's heading over to the Mountain West, where he will play at New Mexico. And then a couple more second-teamers as well. Trevion Tennyson goes from Corpus Christi to TCU, moving all the way up to the Big 12. That's a nice jump for him. And then Southland Freshman of the Year, Nate Calmisi, goes from Lamar to all the way up to Seattle, Washington to play for Mike Hopkins and the Huskies. Last thing here before we get into our previews, who's going to win the conference, all that good stuff. While we often talk about transfers leaving the low majors, there are also always transfers who are kind of coming down from that Power 6 level, transferring to a lower major school for the hopes of more playing time, more opportunity. And while not everybody's going to be Brandon Pajemski, who went from Illinois to Santa Clara and then, of course, turned into a top 20 draft pick, you do see guys come down and have significant success when they transfer to a lower major. Three key ones go into McNeese to play for Will Wade. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about our favorites for conference, but that is Shahada Wells going from TCU to McNeese, Mike Saunders going from Utah to McNeese, and then CJ Felder from Florida to the Cowboys. There's also Anthony Thomas going from Kansas State to Northwestern State. Four guys to keep an eye on as they make that transition to a lower level to potentially be significant contributors in the Southland Conference this upcoming season. We're going to close out the show and the week here on Locked On College Basketball, discussing the favorites and the dark horse teams to potentially snag that Southland auto bid in the NCAA Tournament, as well as some end-of-the-season award predictions, all coming up after a word from today's sponsor, FanDuel. Snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time than right now to get in on the action. The app is super easy to use. You can bet on all sorts of stuff. You can bet on spreads. You can bet on player props, over-unders, money line, all of that and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. All right, folks, closing out the show today with our Southland preview. We talked about some of the big storylines. We're going to talk now about our favorites to win the league. And we got to start with McNeese. We have to start with the Cowboys here, hiring Will Wade. And this is a team that was in 8th place last year. They went 6-12 in the Southland Conference. They went 11-23 overall. But with the additions this team brought in, with Will Wade, who's again not going to coach for the first third of the year, out 10 games, but with him coming in, with his pedigree, with the talent coming in, this is a program that has a very legitimate chance to go from 8th to 1st, even though they haven't been at the tournament since 2002. Now, they lost a couple key pieces. They lost Zach Scott. They lost Jonathan Massey. Massey transferred to Longwood. Scott leaves without any more eligibility, 2 double-digit scores, but it's hard to ignore that trio of Power 5 transfers joining this team. Shahada Wells averaged 6 points and 2.3 assists at TCU. Prior to that, he was a 17-point-per-game scorer at UT San Antonio. Mike Saunders comes in, junior guard from Utah, averaged 4.1 points per game. They also had 6'7" senior forward CJ Felder, who averaged 2.3 points and about 3 rebounds per game under Todd Golden at Florida. 3 big-time additions from TCU, Florida, and Utah. Good, solid basketball programs. 2 of those teams probably going to be in the big dance this upcoming season. That's a lot of really premier talent, veteran experience to bring into a roster like this. They also had Damian Richards, who averaged 10.5 points at UT San Antonio last year. They also had Antavion Collum, who averaged 13 points per game at Bakersfield. So there is an influx of talent joining the Cowboys this season. Again, haven't been for a very long time. Can Wade make it this year? I'll tell you what, I don't think they're going to finish 8th again. I'm not sure if they're going to win it, but it's hard to imagine they're not in the top 3 just with the amount of talent that's on this roster. The other big favorite here is Southeastern Louisiana. They went 18-14 last year, including 12-6 in the league. They also retained 4 of their 5 starters. They do lose Boogie Anderson, who averaged about 14 points per game last year, but they retain the rest of their starting lineup, and they also add a transfer from Austin Peay in Carlos Paez. Paez averaged 7.8 points, 3.6 assists, and shot about 35% from 3. If he can adequately replicate Boogie's performance last year, not crazy to imagine that Southeast Louisiana, who was the favorite predictor, the winner of the coaches poll when they did their media days. So this is certainly a team that the coaches believe has a chance to win the league. So I think for me, it's between Southeastern Louisiana as well as McNeese are probably the favorites, but there is a dark horse. There's always a dark horse when we're doing our conference previews here on Locked On College Basketball. And for me, that dark horse team is New Orleans. 7-11 last year. They finished 6th in the conference. They lose 3 key rotation pieces, but they retain all their starters. I think that's a really big key for this team. Very, very rare for low major teams. If you finished outside the top 5 of a low major conference and managed to retain the majority of your key performers from the year prior, that's a really, really big benefit for continuity. Helps you early in the season, helps you just really throughout the season, helps you when you get to the NCAA tournament, or at least when you get to the conference tournament, I should say. Beyond that, they have the best player in the conference. Jordan Johnson, 18 points per game last year, 48% from 3. This dude is a bucket. Really high level scorer, solid distributor, great outside shooter. This is a really big player to retain for New Orleans. He could have gone to a lot of different places and he would have gotten that kind of attention from some Power 5 programs, but he stays at New Orleans. They also add some depth transfers in Mason Jones from Rice, as well as James Glisson from Mercer, guys who should contribute for this team, help replicate some of those key depth options they lost in the portal. But as long as they have Jordan Johnson, this is a hard team to beat night in and night out in the Southland Conference. And I think there's a real chance that they go from 6th to 3rd, 2nd. All it takes is a couple good games in the conference tournament, and bam, they're in the big dance. We're going to tier out the teams here in this conference before we make our award predictions. Tier 1, we're going to keep the top 2 at the top, McNeese and Southeastern Louisiana. I think they're the 2 most likely teams to potentially win this tournament, or to win this automatic bid and to win the regular season. So I'll have them in their own tier, but I got New Orleans right below them in tier 2 alongside Northwestern State and Texas A&M Corpus Christi, who's won the regular season the last couple of years, but had a significant roster overhaul after changing coaches this offseason. Tier 3 has 3 more programs. Texas A&M Commerce, who is very new to the Division I level, but proved to be very solid last season. Also, a couple of programs with coaching changes that are hard to know how that's going to shake out in Incarnate Word and Nichols. And then rounding it out with Tier 4, which is Lamar and Houston Christian. All right, closing out the show and the week with our award predictions here for the Southland Conference on Locked On College Basketball Player of the Year. I already teased it, folks. It's Jordan Johnson. This guy might average 20 this year. 18 points last year, 3.8 assists, 2.3 rebounds, also 1.3 steals. And like I said, 48% from deep. New Orleans is a solid program. I think he's going to have a similar role. Again, the similar starting lineup, so there's not really any expectation that things have to dramatically change for him. And I think he's going to come into this year looking extra sharp and potentially be one of not too many 20-point per game scorers in all of college basketball, which should be plenty for him, especially if New Orleans moves from 6th to 3rd or 2nd in the conference. That should be plenty for him to take home that Player of the Year award. Transfer/newcomer of the year, I'm going with one of those 3 Power 5 transfers over at McNeese, and that's Shahada Wells, coming over from TCU, a guy who averaged 17 points per game at UT Arlington in the 2020-21 season. He then transferred to TCU, spent 2 years at TCU, only played 7 games his first season with the Horned Frogs, but last year, 5.9 points, 2.3 assists. He played all 35 games for the Horned Frogs. He also made 9 starts. You go from starting 9 games at TCU to McNeese, I think he's going to be a guy who's already scored 17 per game at a lower level. I think he's going to be a guy who's really productive. I honestly almost consider him I do consider him a strong candidate to be Player of the Year as well, and certainly a very strong candidate to be the newcomer of the year. He should run point guard for what I think might be the best team in the entire conference, and should learn a lot from Will Wade, who's very good at coaching guards. For his pedigree indicates he's very good at coaching guards. Coach of the year, I'm going with Mark Schlesinger at New Orleans. Again, if I think they're going to jump from 6th to 3rd or 6th to 2nd, that's probably how you get that award. He won it back in the 2016-17 season. He's been the head coach at NO for 12 years now. So a guy who's been around, who knows how to coach in this conference, who's already taken home this award. And if Jordan Johnson leads this team to a top 3 finish in the conference, I think Schlesinger is the one who takes that award home. Finally, we're finishing with Defensive Player of the Year. I'm going with Bonk Maring from Houston Christian. Houston Christian is probably one of the worst teams in the league. And quite honestly, Houston Christian was one of the worst defensive teams in all of college basketball last year, which typically doesn't lead to having the Conference Player of the Year. But Bonk Maring was awesome. He's a great offensive player. He led the team in points, rebounds, I think assists, steals, and blocks. If not all 5 of them, at least 4 out of those 5 categories. He was 1.1 blocks per game last year. He's a 6'10" big. He's very athletic. There's not a lot of 6'10" athletic bigs in the Southland Conference. To me, I think Maring takes a step forward. I think Houston improves on the defensive. Houston Christian improves on the defensive end of the floor enough that he is the guy. If he's 1.5 blocks per game, if he's 8 rebounds per game, if this team makes strides defensively, I think that's enough for him to be the guy who gets that Defensive Player of the Year trophy for the Huskies. All right, that's going to wrap us up for today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. We'll be back next week with more conference previews with some top 25 rankings. We'll talk best passers, best rebounders, best in the college basketball. We are just a few weeks away, folks, from college basketball being fully back. We got secret scrimmages. We got media days, all sorts of good stuff coming your way right here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube as well. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, as always, peace out.